To South Africa now, where the government has condemned President Trump's comments about land reform, describing them as divisive. In a tweet, Mr. Trump referred to land seizures in South Africa and what he said was the large-scale killing of farmers there. Now, he said he had asked his Secretary of State to look into the matter. Land ownership is one of the most sensitive issues in the country's post-apartheid history. Nomsa Maseko has more.
Yet another controversial Donald Trump tweet. This time about South Africa's land reform policy. The US president claims white farmers are being killed on a large scale and that the South African government has already started seizing land. But that's far from the truth. The South African government has rejected what it has described as a narrow perception which seeks to divide the nation. It also says amending a section of the Constitution which will allow the expropriation of land without compensation is far from completion. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa spent much of his time during a question and answer session in Parliament on Wednesday seeking to allay fears around this issue.
The acceleration of land redistribution is necessary not only to redress a grave historical injustice, but also to bring more producers into the agricultural sector and to make more land available for cultivation.
The Economic Freedom Fighters, an opposition party, has been driving the debate around land reform in South Africa.
Death is the first price we are prepared to pay. The second price we are prepared to pay for this land is poverty. They will close taps. But if there is a conviction, and not sloganeering and public opinions, then we must be prepared for everything. It's a war.
For South Africans, this is an emotive issue.
I'm saying it's typical of Trump. I'm not surprised that comes from Trump. If it was somebody else, I'll be shocked, really. But with Trump, you have to take anything he says with a pinch of salt.
I feel that Trump shouldn't be involved in what happens in South Africa. He shouldn't dictate what happens in our country, especially with him trying to build a wall where people of color are not allowed in his country.
The amendment of the Constitution on land reform has sparked an important debate in a country seeking to address the injustices of the past. Nomsa Maseko, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Well, let's bring in Angelo Fick. He's a Southern African researcher. He joins us now from Johannesburg. Thanks for taking time to talk to us. Now, land is a very, very sensitive issue at this time in South Africa. We've seen President Trump weigh in with a tweet. What could have motivated him to do that? And does he really grasp the issues on the land reforms in South Africa?
Well, there's very little evidence that President Trump does grasp the issues primarily because of his source. His source is Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson's source is presumably some of what we've seen of South African, white, right-wing South Africans traveling across the United States to sell this idea of a white genocide that is happening, as they say, across farms. Africa Check in South Africa and various other institutions have actually found that none of the research proves this, because the Statistician General, the crime statistics for South Africa indicate that while there are indeed farm murders, it is no higher than the average and therefore also quite unacceptable rate of killings in South Africa in other forms of crime.
So what does this then do to the relationship between South Africa and the US at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I think people are, not responding, shall we say, unfairly or sort of out of a gut reaction from government's perspective. They've indicated that they will use the diplomatic channels to address the issue. For South Africans, there are, of course, consequences. But I think what many South Africans are observing in this is that Donald Trump is using this incident in order to deflect from very specific domestic challenges that he's had this week in the Mueller investigation, with the Paul Manafort conviction and the guilty plea handed in by his lawyer, his former lawyer, Mr. Cohen. So there are specific domestic issues in the United States that I think many people here are seeing this particular tweet as yet another example. And it relates to the history of tweeting around international issues that Mr. Trump has had over the last year, specifically when he has domestic challenges. We've seen this with his relationship with North Korea, we've seen it with Turkey, we've seen it with Iran.
No, so that what does this mean now? Can South Africa afford to ignore the message that he's trying to send at all?
I don't think South Africa is ignoring the message, but I think South Africa is pursuing the issue as a sovereign state that has a democratic order. All of this issue, the contention in South Africa, is happening within the frame of law. It is a long-term process. If there is going to be constitutional reform, as the ANC says it is committed to, it will not simply happen by individual diktats. It's not just that President Ramaphosa can declare this. It would have to go via Parliament. After the two houses of Parliament, it would have to be tested in a court, and it can be contested all the way up to the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court. The independence of the judiciary from the legislature and the executive has been proven again and again, even in the toughest period under Jacob Zuma. So South Africa will engage in this process as with the United States as a partner, as from state to state, but the internal process in South Africa will have to follow the process that happens in any democratic society, the parliamentary process of consultations in public. That's happened, the hearings, the submissions. There is a second process which will happen through the parliamentary caucus of the ANC, and presumably we are not anywhere near a resolution of this process, as the President of the Republic indicated yesterday,
right.
And as most observers of this have indicated, it would take at least 3 to 5 years for this to be finalized.
So it's a huge process still ahead. So was it wise then for President Trump to have tweeted on such a sensitive issue briefly?
No, but it wasn't wise for him to have done so on Iran, on Turkey, on North Korea and South Korea's peace processes before. But this hasn't, in fact, stopped him. So this is not the first time that an international figure does this on the land reform issue in South Africa. A minister in the Australian government has done this a few months ago. And while Australia is not quite a significant player in the international framing of these kinds of conflicts, the United States is, and so the United States President's tweeting of this has real consequences for the way in which ordinary South Africans will be talking to one another about this, because those who are conservative and right-wing will argue that actually this proves just how dangerous the process is, and those who are actually committed to resolving this issue peacefully and to the benefit of all 56 million people in the country will argue that this should not distract and derail the process by which all of that legislation and actual acts of colonialism and apartheid that led to the dispossession and alienation of the majority of black South Africans from the land has to be redressed. And that's not simply a matter of political correctness or convenience. All
right. Angelo Flick, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for talking to us on Focus on Africa. Thank you.